The Galactic Empire's flagship Zefraxis loomed over Earth, a monolithic silhouette against the stars. Its hull shimmered with a faint greenish hue, as if the void itself recoiled from its presence. The sheer size of the vessel dwarfed anything humanity had sent into orbit, and its escorts, sleek, fang-like destroyers, hovered around it like predatory birds circling their prey. From the Zefraxis's command bridge, Admiral Kalar Wrath gazed at the blue planet below with a smirk of disdain. "This is the mighty Earth," he sneered, his voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of the command deck's machinery. "A backwater speck in the galaxy, and they dare to challenge us?" The bridge was a symphony of precision, its officers moving with the mechanical efficiency of a war machine long accustomed to conquest. Holographic displays flickered with real-time data, casting pale light on alien faces etched with confidence. Kalar's mandibles clicked faintly as he gestured toward the central holomap, a three-dimensional projection of Earth's orbit. "They've been silent, sir," one of his officers reported, their tone laced with confusion. "No response to our demands for surrender." "Typical primitives," Kalar muttered. He leaned closer to the holomap, his gaze narrowing. "Perhaps they're too frightened to speak." The ultimatum broadcast had gone unanswered for hours. To the Empire, this silence was an insult. To Earth, it was calculated. In the shadow of the asteroid belt, Captain Riker Thorne stood aboard the Resolute, Earth's flagship. Around him, the bridge was alive with quiet energy, every officer performing their task with laser focus. The muted hum of the cloaking generator filled the air, blending with the faint scent of ozone from the ship's advanced systems. "Admiral Wrath sounds upset," said Lieutenant Zara Hikari, her voice carrying a note of amusement. She sat at the cloaking console, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Should we send him flowers?" Riker's lips twitched into a faint smile, but his eyes remained fixed on the holographic display at the center of the bridge. It showed the Empire's fleet in vivid detail, the data streaming in from a network of cloaked reconnaissance drones. Each ship was marked, its position calculated, its weaknesses quietly noted. "Flowers might be too subtle," Riker replied. His voice was calm, measured, like a man who had long mastered the art of holding steady in the eye of a storm. "Perhaps we should let him wonder why we haven't replied." Zara grinned. "Nothing unsettles a bully like silence." Riker turned to Commander Eli Brandt, his tactical officer, whose expression was a mix of concern and determination. "What's our status?" "Cloaking field is holding steady across the fleet," Brandt said. "They have no idea we're here. Railgun systems are charged and ready. Drones are maintaining surveillance. But if they deploy countermeasures, they won't get the chance," Riker interrupted. "Not yet." The air on the Resolute was thick with tension, the kind that coiled in the chest and tightened every breath. The faint vibration of the ship's engines carried through the floor, grounding Riker in the moment. He knew the stakes. Earth's survival rested on their ability to turn the Empire's arrogance against them. "Sir," Zara said, her tone shifting to seriousness, "incoming transmission from the Zefraxis. Audio only." Riker gestured for her to play it. The bridge fell silent as Admiral Wrath's voice filled the room, dripping with condescension. "People of Earth," Wrath began, his words slow and deliberate, "you've had ample time to respond. Surrender your planet and all its resources, and you may yet survive to serve the Empire. Resist, and we will reduce your world to ash." The transmission ended, the threat hanging in the air like smoke after a gunshot. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Zara let out a soft laugh. "Reduce us to ash?" she said. "That's original." Riker's expression didn't change, but there was a glint of something sharp in his eyes. He glanced at the comms officer. "Open a line. Let's send our response." The officer nodded, tapping at the console. A faint chime signaled the connection, and Riker spoke with deliberate calm, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Admiral Wrath," he said, "your concern for Earth is touching, but we're quite content as we are. Feel free to come closer if you'd like to discuss it." There was a pause, and then Zara pressed a button, adding a pre-recorded burst of laughter to the transmission. It was light, mocking, and unmistakably human. The comms closed before Wrath could reply, leaving the Empire's flagship in stunned silence. On the Zefraxis, Wrath's mandibles flared in irritation. "How dare they mock us?" "Admiral," another officer said, their voice hesitant, "our scans still show no sign of their fleet. It's odd." "It's cowardice," Wrath snapped. "They hide because they know they can't face us." But deep in his gut, Wrath felt the faint stirrings of unease. Something about Earth's response gnawed at him, a sense that they were being toyed with. He pushed the thought aside, unwilling to admit that these primitives might be capable of strategy. Meanwhile, Riker leaned over the holographic display on the Resolute. His crew was focused, their chatter reduced to quiet exchanges as they prepared for what came next. Riker studied the Empire's formation, noting the gaps in their shield coverage and the positions of their smaller ships. "They're grouping too tightly around the Zefraxis," Brandt observed. "It's like they're daring us to attack." Riker nodded. "Because they don't believe we can. Zara, keep the cloaking system stable. Brandt, prepare firing solutions for railguns. Focus on their cruisers first. We'll save the flagship for later." "And the drones?" Brandt asked. "They'll deploy soon," Riker said. "Let them. We'll deal with them when the time comes." Zara glanced at him. "You're awfully calm for someone staring down the galaxy's biggest fleet." Riker allowed himself a faint smile. "They think we're a joke. Let's make sure they never laugh again." The bridge buzzed with activity as Riker's crew carried out his orders, their movements precise despite the tension in the air. Outside, the vast expanse of space stretched endlessly, the asteroid belt a cloak of shadows hiding humanity's greatest gamble. As the Empire's fleet loomed larger, its ships glowing like malignant stars, Riker tightened his grip on the edge of the display. The battle had not yet begun, but every fiber of his being told him that, when it did, it would change everything. And through it all, he remained steady, his resolve unshaken. For Riker Thorne, silence was not surrender. It was the promise of an answer that would leave the Empire questioning everything they thought they knew. The Zefraxis began to shift, its colossal engines igniting with a low, resonant hum that reverberated through the void like the awakening of a slumbering behemoth. From the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Riker Thorne's eyes narrowed as the flagship adjusted its position. The Empire's fleet moved with practiced elegance, their shimmering hulls cutting through the darkness in perfect formation. "They're repositioning," Commander Brandt said, his voice tight as he studied the holographic display. "That's not a show of force, it's preparation." Riker's jaw tightened. The subtlety of the Empire's maneuver wasn't lost on him. Wrath wasn't just repositioning, he was coiling, like a serpent about to strike. "They're testing us, seeing how we respond." Zara Hikari, at the cloaking console, glanced over her shoulder. "So what do we give them? Silence or fireworks?" "Neither," Riker said, his tone sharp. "Let them wonder." Beyond the cloaked fleet, the Empire's ships began to fan out, their hulls glinting under the pale starlight. Smaller cruisers surged forward, their thrusters leaving faint trails of ionized particles. A pair of heavy destroyers shifted to the flanks, their gunports glowing faintly as energy weapons charged. Admiral Kalar Wrath stood on the Zefraxis's bridge, his posture rigid and commanding. His yellow eyes scanned the expanse before him, narrowing at the blank void where Earth's defenses should have been. The silence, once amusing, now grated against his nerves. "Still nothing?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the murmur of the bridge. "No response? No movement?" an officer replied. "It's as if they're mocking us," Wrath interrupted, his mandibles twitching with irritation. He gestured sharply toward the weapons officer. "Prepare orbital bombardment. I will not let these primitives test my patience any longer." A ripple of approval spread through the Empire's officers, their confidence bolstered by the Admiral's decisiveness. From the lower decks of the Zefraxis, planetary assault batteries rotated into position. Their long barrels gleamed with a cold, metallic menace as they locked onto Earth's surface. On the Resolute, the tension was palpable. Riker's crew moved with quiet precision, their focus unbroken despite the looming threat. The air on the bridge was charged, the faint hum of the cloaking generator a constant reminder of their precarious position. "They're targeting the planet," Brandt said, his voice low, If they fire, they won't hit anything important, Riker interrupted, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. Ground defenses are ready, and they know it. This is a message, not an attack. Zara's fingers hovered over her console. Still, it's a hell of a message. The first barrage came without warning. Massive bolts of energy streaked through the void, their light reflecting off the asteroid belt like a macabre aurora. The impact against Earth's atmospheric shield sent shockwaves rippling outward, the soundless explosion casting a ghostly glow across the planet's surface. On the Zefraxis, Wrath watched the display with grim satisfaction. Let them see what they're up against. But satisfaction quickly turned to confusion. Earth's shield absorbed the attack with an efficiency that bordered on insolence. The energy dissipated harmlessly, leaving only faint ripples in the planet's protective barrier. What is this? Wrath growled, his voice rising. Why haven't their defenses faltered? The officer at the sensor station hesitated, their hands shaking slightly. Their shield. It's more advanced than our scans indicated. Enough! Wrath snapped, his mandibles clicking in frustration. Deploy drones. I want every inch of this system scanned. The order sent a ripple of activity through the fleet. Swarms of sleek black drones launched from the cruisers, their wings unfolding like predatory insects as they dispersed in all directions. Each drone emitted a faint, high-pitched whine that resonated faintly in the Resolute's sensor array. Zara frowned, her fingers flying over her console. They've released drones, advanced models. They're sweeping for cloaked ships. Riker's gaze hardened. Countermeasures? I'm running interference, but if they get close enough... Zara trailed off, her brow furrowing with concentration. We'll be exposed. The air on the bridge seemed heavier, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Riker's mind raced, his thoughts a torrent of calculations and contingencies. Every decision carried the potential for salvation or disaster. Deploy decoy signatures, he ordered. Make them think they found us. Brant nodded, his hands moving swiftly across his console. Moments later, the cloaked fleet released a series of false signals, each one carefully designed to mimic the energy signature of a human ship. The decoys floated in the void like phantoms, their faint glow drawing the attention of the drones. On the Zefraxis, the sensor officer's face lit up with triumph. We've found them! Cloaked ships detected at Vector 9-3! Wrath's mandibles curled into a predatory smile. At last! Destroy them! The Empire's cruisers opened fire, their energy beams slicing through the decoy field with ruthless efficiency. Explosions erupted in the void, scattering debris and creating a dazzling light show. But as the last decoy was obliterated, the Empire's sensors revealed nothing. They're gone, the officer stammered, their confidence crumbling. It was a trick. Wrath's eyes burned with fury. How dare they toy with us? On the Resolute, Zara let out a soft laugh. Looks like they took the bait. Riker's lips curved into a faint smile, but his expression remained focused. They're angry now. That makes them dangerous. The drones continued their sweep, their whines growing louder as they neared the asteroid belt. Riker's crew watched the sensors intently, their tension mirrored in the faint sheen of sweat on their brows. Captain, Zara said, her voice urgent, one of the drones is too close. It's picking up anomalies. Riker's gaze sharpened. Prepare to fire. Zara hesitated. But if we attack, they'll know we're here, Riker finished. But if we don't, they'll find us anyway. He turned to Brant. Coordinate with the fleet. On my mark, eliminate the drones. Brant's hands flew across the controls, his voice steady as he relayed the order. The bridge fell silent, the crew holding their breath as the countdown began. Mark, Riker said. The Resolute fired, its railguns releasing a silent burst of kinetic energy that struck the nearest drone with surgical precision. Across the fleet, similar strikes took down the remaining drones in a matter of seconds. The debris floated in the void, silent witnesses to humanity's precision. On the Zefraxis, Wrath's fury boiled over. What is the meaning of this? He roared, his voice echoing through the bridge. How are they doing this? But no one had an answer. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, and filled with the growing realization that the Empire was no longer in control. Back on the Resolute, Riker allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "They're off balance," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Now, it's our turn." The bridge erupted into quiet activity as the crew prepared for the next phase. The tension was still there, coiled and waiting, but now it was accompanied by something else, a flicker of hope. The first strike was coming, and humanity would make it count. The quiet hum of the Resolute's systems was the only sound as Captain Riker Thorne leaned over the holographic display. The map shimmered with the Empire's fleet positions, meticulously updated by cloaked reconnaissance drones that flitted through the void like unseen specters. Their massive flagship, Zefraxis, sat at the heart of the formation, its energy shields glowing faintly like the faint, arrogant pulse of a predator's heart. Riker's steel-gray eyes narrowed as he examined the patterns, his mind piecing together the Empire's strategy. Their movements were precise, practiced, yet something about them felt brittle, as though the weight of their confidence would shatter if struck at the right moment. "We're in position," Commander Eli Brandt said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, anticipation, tempered by nerves. "All railguns are locked onto the cruisers flanking their flagship. One volley and they'll fold." Riker straightened, the faint hum of the hologram casting an eerie glow over his face. "Not yet," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Let them come closer." Brandt frowned. "Closer? They've got anti-cloaking systems scanning the belt. If they figure out we're here—" "They won't," Riker interrupted, his tone sharper now. He looked at Brandt, his gaze unwavering. "Not until it's too late." Zara Hikari, seated at the cloaking console, glanced back over her shoulder. "I hope you're right," she said, her usual wit replaced with an uncharacteristic seriousness. "Because those drones they sent earlier, they were just the scouts." As if to punctuate her words, the Resolute's sensors pinged softly. Another wave of drones had deployed from the Zefraxis, their dark forms slicing through the asteroid field with predatory precision. Each one emitted a faint, rhythmic hum that resonated in the ship's hull like the heartbeat of an encroaching threat. "More of them," Brandt muttered, his jaw tightening. "They're sweeping the entire belt." Riker didn't respond immediately. He stared at the display, his mind working through the possibilities. The air on the bridge felt heavier now, the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. The faint tang of ozone from the cloaking generator filled the room, mixing with the sharper metallic scent of the weapon systems, priming for action. "Zara," Riker said finally, his voice cutting through the silence. "Activate the field distorters. Scatter their sensors." Zara's hands flew across the console, the soft glow of the controls reflecting in her sharp green eyes. "Distorters online," she said. "Let's see how they're toys like chasing ghosts." The drones began to falter, their precise formations fracturing as their sensors scrambled. The rhythmic hum shifted into erratic bursts, like a predator disoriented by a sudden flood of light. Riker watched the display closely, his lips curving into a faint smile as the drones veered away, their paths spiraling into chaos. "They'll recalibrate soon," Brandt warned. "We've bought ourselves maybe 30 seconds. "That's all we need," Riker replied. He stepped back from the display, his voice rising slightly as he addressed the bridge. "Prepare the railguns. Target their flanking cruisers. Full volley." A flurry of activity erupted as the crew carried out his orders. The muted vibrations of the railgun systems charging resonated through the ship, a low, steady rumble that thrummed in Riker's chest. Outside, the cloaked fleet aligned their weapons, each railgun locking onto its target with deadly precision. "On your mark, Captain," Brandt said, his hands hovering over the controls. Riker stared at the hologram, his eyes fixed on the Empire's formation. The cruisers were vulnerable, spread too thin to support one another, but close enough that their destruction would ripple through the fleet. He could almost feel the moment drawing closer, like the tension before a lightning strike. "Fire!" he said. The railguns erupted in unison, their silent projectiles streaking through the void faster than the eye could follow. The first impact was devastating. A cruiser's shield flared briefly before shattering, the kinetic force tearing through its hull with surgical precision. Explosions rippled outward, debris scattering like shards of glass against the black canvas of space. On the Zefraxis, the bridge was chaos. Admiral Kalar Rath's eyes widened as the reports flooded in, each one more catastrophic than the last. 3 cruisers destroyed, an officer shouted, their voice tinged with disbelief. Shields were useless, Rath finished, his voice low and venomous. His mandibles clicked with irritation as he turned to the sensor officer. Find them. I want every cloaked ship in this system exposed. But the Zefraxis' sensors found nothing. The cloaked human fleet had already repositioned, vanishing into the asteroid field like smoke dissipating in the wind. Rath's claws curled into fists, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. Cowards, he spat. They strike from the shadows because they know they cannot face us. Back on the Resolute, Riker watched the aftermath of the strike with quiet satisfaction. The Empire's formation was unraveling, destroyers scrambling to fill the gaps left by the cruisers, their movements frantic and disorganized. But he knew the victory was only temporary. They'll regroup, he said, his voice cutting through the bridge's subdued celebration. And when they do, they'll hit harder. They'll also overcommit, Zara said, her grin returning. And that's when we hit back. Riker nodded. Exactly. Prepare for Phase 2. As the crew moved to carry out his orders, a soft ping from the comm console drew Riker's attention. The sound was faint, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight that sent a chill down his spine. Unidentified signal, Zara said, her fingers hovering over the controls. It's coming from within the fleet. Riker's gaze hardened. From one of our ships? No, she said slowly, her brow furrowing. From inside our ship. The realization struck like a thunderclap. Riker's jaw clenched as he turned to Brandt. Lock down all comms. Nobody transmits without my authorization. Brandt moved swiftly, his fingers flying over the console as the bridge descended into a tense silence. Riker's mind raced, the implications of the signal spiraling into dangerous territory. There's a spy on board, Zara said, her voice low but steady. Her usual humor was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused determination. They've been feeding intel to the Empire. Riker exhaled slowly, his hands tightening into fists. The revelation was a crack in the foundation, a threat that could unravel everything they'd worked for. But he couldn't let it. Not now. We'll deal with it, he said, his voice resolute. But first, we finish this. The bridge was silent again, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Outside, the Empire's fleet continued to shift, their movements growing more desperate with each passing second. The Zefraxis loomed at the center, its shields pulsing faintly like a beacon of misplaced confidence. Riker's gaze returned to the holographic display, his mind already working through the next move. The spy was a problem, but not an insurmountable one. He would find them. He would stop them. And when the time came, he would ensure the Empire learned the cost of underestimating humanity. Zara, he said quietly, prepare to deploy the drones. Let's see how they handle Phase 2. The bridge of the Resolute was a hive of tension and purpose, as Captain Riker Thorne stood at the center of the room, his posture rigid, his mind a storm of calculations. Every breath felt heavier in the artificial atmosphere, tinged with the metallic tang of recycled air and the faint hum of systems at full alert. The holographic display before him showed the Empire's fleet coiling tighter, the gaps in their formation narrowing as they regrouped. The wreckage of their destroyed cruisers floated like silent witnesses to humanity's first strike. Phase 2 is ready, Zara Hikari announced from the cloaking console, her voice clipped but steady. Her fingers danced over the controls, adjusting the calibrations of the drones that Riker had ordered into position. The faint glow from her console reflected in her focused eyes, contrasting with the chaos outside. Riker nodded, his gaze never leaving the display. Deploy them, he said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. Make it look like a retreating force. Zara's hands moved swiftly, and a moment later, a swarm of cloaked decoy drones scattered into the void. Each emitted faint energy signals designed to mimic the signature of human ships. They moved in erratic patterns, darting between asteroids and disappearing into shadows. On the Zefraxis, Admiral Kalar Wrath stared at his own holographic display, his mandibles clicking in growing frustration. The decoy signals appeared on the sensors like faint flickers of prey, darting through the darkness. "They're trying to escape," one of his officers reported, a note of triumph in their voice. "Fools," Wrath growled, his claws tightening around the edge of the console. "Send the destroyers after them. Flush them out." The Empire's destroyers surged forward, breaking from their tight formation to pursue the decoys. Their energy weapons charged, glowing faintly like embers in the night, while their engines roared with the urgency of predators sensing blood. On the Resolute, Riker watched the display with a faint smile. "They've taken the bait," he said softly. Commander Brandt, standing nearby, exhaled slowly. "That splits their forces," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But we're still outnumbered." "That's the point," Riker replied, his voice firm. "They think they're chasing us into a trap. What they don't realize is that they're already in one." The bridge grew quieter as the crew absorbed his words. Outside, the decoys continued to lead the destroyers deeper into the asteroid field. The real fleet, still cloaked, remained in position, their railguns trained on the weakened core of the Empire's formation. "They've left the Zefraxis vulnerable," Riker said, his gaze sharpening. "Zara, recalibrate targeting systems. We're going for their shield generators." "On it," Zara replied, her hands moving with practiced precision. The hum of the targeting systems rose slightly, filling the bridge with a faint, resonant vibration that seemed to echo in their bones. "Brandt," Riker continued, turning to his tactical officer, "prepare for staggered volleys. Hit their shield generators first, then their propulsion systems. I don't want them running before we're finished." Brandt nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Railguns are locked and ready. Just give the word." Riker leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the console as he studied the Empire's fleet. The Zefraxis sat at the center, its shields glowing faintly like a thin, iridescent shell. It was a fortress, and yet its arrogance had left it exposed. "Fire!" Riker said. The railguns roared in unison, their silent projectiles streaking through the void with deadly precision. The first volley struck the Zefraxis's shields, the impact sending ripples across its glowing surface. The second volley followed almost immediately, punching through the weakened barrier and slamming into the ship's hull. On the Zefraxis, alarms blared as the bridge erupted into chaos. Admiral Wrath staggered as the deck beneath him shuddered violently. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, and the acrid scent of burning circuits filled the air. "Shields are down!" an officer shouted, their voice panicked. "Propulsion systems are—" A second impact cut them off, the force throwing them to the floor. Wrath's claws raked across the console as he struggled to regain his balance. His eyes burned with fury as he stared at the display. "Where are they?" he roared. "Where is their fleet?" The question hung unanswered, the silence a testament to the Empire's failure. On the Resolute, Riker stood unflinching as his crew worked with precision. "Zara, deploy the second wave of decoys. Keep them focused on the destroyers." "Already done," Zara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "The real fleet is holding position. They're blind to us." Riker turned to Brandt. "Shift targeting to their propulsion systems. I don't want that flagship moving." The next volley of railgun fire struck with devastating accuracy, tearing through the Zefraxis's engines. The massive ship shuddered violently, its forward momentum halting as its propulsion systems failed. Admiral Wrath staggered again, his claws scraping against the console. "Status report," he bellowed. "The engines are offline," an officer said, their voice trembling. "We're dead in the water." Wrath's mandibles flared as he turned to the sensor officer. "And the humans? Have we found them?" The officer hesitated, their hands shaking as they scanned the displays. "No, Admiral. It's as if—" They trailed off, their voice dropping to a whisper. "As if they're everywhere." On the Resolute, Riker's expression remained unreadable as he watched the Zefraxis falter. "Prepare for the final volley," he said. Brant hesitated. "Sir, if we hit their command deck—" "We won't," Riker interrupted, his tone sharp. "We don't need to. This isn't about annihilation. It's about sending a message." The bridge fell silent as the crew carried out his orders. Outside, the human fleet realigned, their cloaked ships moving into position for the final strike. Riker's voice cut through the silence, calm and resolute. "Fire!" The railguns roared again, their projectiles slamming into the Zefraxis with pinpoint precision. The impacts tore through critical systems, leaving the massive ship crippled, but intact. On the Zefraxis, the alarms finally fell silent, replaced by the hollow, echoing sounds of failure. Admiral Wrath slumped against the console, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. The human fleet was still invisible, their presence felt only through the devastating precision of their attacks. "They've beaten us," Wrath murmured, the words tasting like ash. Back on the Resolute, Riker exhaled slowly, his grip on the console relaxing. The bridge was quiet now, the tension replaced by a subdued sense of victory. "Send the message," Riker said, his voice steady. Zara nodded, activating the comms. A single phrase echoed across the Empire's remaining fleet, carried by the same mocking laughter they had heard before. "Underestimate us again," Riker said, his voice calm but firm. "And next time, you won't see us coming." The Resolute hovered in the darkness of the asteroid belt, its cloaking system seamlessly blending the ship into the star-dappled void. On the bridge, the atmosphere was electric, a heady mix of tension and triumph, as Captain Riker Thorne watched the holographic display. The Zefraxis, the pride of the Galactic Empire, was broken. Its engines were dark, its shields inoperable, and its weapons silenced. Yet Riker didn't allow himself to relax. Victory, he knew, was a fragile thing, earned in moments, but lost in an instant of complacency. "Status report," he said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. "Empire forces are in full retreat," Commander Eli Brant replied, his tone edged with disbelief. "The destroyers are pulling back to cover their flagship. Their fleet is barely holding formation." "And the drones?" Riker asked, his gaze never leaving the hologram. "Deactivated," Zara Hikari interjected, her fingers moving swiftly over the cloaking console. "They lost control when we hit their command relay. Guess even their tech can't handle a severed spine." The faintest hint of a smile tugged at Riker's lips, but his attention remained sharp. "What about the Zefraxis?" "Dead in the water," Brant said, shaking his head. "They've got backup power, but their main systems are fried. It's not going anywhere." Riker nodded. His crew had executed flawlessly, but there was still one final move to make, a move that would cement humanity's place in the galaxy, a move that would send a message not just to the Empire, but to anyone watching. "Open a wideband comm channel," Riker ordered. "Let's have a word with Admiral Wrath." Zara's fingers flew across her console, her grin mischievous as she activated the comms. "Channel open, Captain. Let's give them something to remember." The silence on the other end was palpable, broken only by the faint static of the Zefraxis's damaged systems. Then a voice crackled through, low, strained, and seething with barely contained fury. "This is Admiral Wrath of the Galactic Empire," the alien growled. "To whom am I speaking?" Riker stepped forward, his posture calm but commanding. "Admiral, this is Captain Riker Thorne of the Earth Defense Fleet. I believe we've just been introduced." Wrath's breath hissed through his mandibles. "You dare address me directly after this mockery?" "Mockery," Riker repeated, his tone laced with quiet amusement. "No, Admiral. This is humanity introducing itself. We wanted to make sure you understood exactly who you were dealing with." "You've sealed your fate," Wrath spat. "The Empire will not tolerate this insult. We will return with a force that—" "Admiral," Riker interrupted, his voice cutting through like a blade, "spare me the threats. You came here expecting an easy conquest, and you got humbled. The next time you think about underestimating us, remember this moment." There was a pause on the other end, heavy with unspoken rage. Wrath's pride, Riker knew, would not allow him to admit defeat, but the silence spoke volumes. "We're not your prey," Riker continued, his voice calm but unyielding. "We're not your servants. We're humanity, and we're here to stay." Zara leaned closer to her console, her voice breaking the tension with a hint of humor. "Don't forget to smile for the galaxy, Admiral. They're watching." Riker nodded at her, and she cut the connection before Wrath could respond. The bridge fell into a brief, stunned silence, then erupted into subdued cheers and murmurs. For a moment, the weight of the battle lifted, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had not just survived, they had won. But Riker's focus didn't waver. He turned to Brandt. "Monitor their retreat. Make sure they're not regrouping for a counterattack." Brandt nodded. "Understood, Captain." Zara leaned back in her chair, exhaling loudly. "That was one hell of a first date. Think they'll call us back?" Riker allowed himself a faint smile. "If they do, we'll be ready." Outside, the human fleet began to decloak, their ships emerging from the shadows like phantoms revealed by dawn. The battered remnants of the Empire's fleet continued their retreat, their once formidable armada now a scattering of bruised and broken ships. The Zefraxis remained, its massive bulk drifting aimlessly in the void. Riker knew the Empire wouldn't leave it behind. They'd return for their flagship eventually, but for now it stood as a testament to what humanity could achieve when pushed to the brink. "Captain," Zara said suddenly, her voice softer now, "what happens next?" Riker's gaze turned to the stars beyond the holographic display. "We rebuild," he said. "We prepare, and we make sure they never forget this day." The bridge fell quiet again, the weight of his words settling over the crew like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. Riker could feel it, the shift, the turning point. Humanity wasn't just a planet anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with, a name that would echo across the galaxy. As the fleet regrouped, Riker stood at the center of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. The faint hum of the ship's systems filled the silence, a reminder of the battle they had fought and won. But in the quiet, there was also a sense of something greater, a sense that this was only the beginning. "Zara," Riker said, his voice steady, "record a message. Make sure it reaches every corner of the Empire." Zara's eyebrows lifted, but she nodded, her fingers flying over the console. "Recording." Riker's gaze didn't waver as he spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "To the Galactic Empire, this is Earth. You thought we were insignificant, a species to be conquered and forgotten. You were wrong. This is your warning. Underestimate us again, and the next time, we won't stop at your flagship." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then, with the faintest hint of a smile, he added, "And Admiral Wrath? Don't just look for us." Think the message ended, and Zara sent it into the void, her grin returning as she leaned back. "That ought to keep them up at night." Riker nodded, his expression unreadable. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy would never be the same. As the fleet began its journey back to Earth, Riker stood alone on the bridge, gazing out at the stars. The faint glow of the Zefraxis lingered in the distance, a silent monument to a victory born of ingenuity, courage, and the unyielding will of a species underestimated one too many times. This was humanity's moment, and Riker knew it would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.